Radio stations pulled them. Program directors blacklisted them. Some were called communist propaganda, others were said to be a danger to national security. These are 15 forgotten protest songs from the 60s and 70s that almost got banned. Number 15, For What It's Worth, by Buffalo Springfield, 1967.
Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Most people who know For What It's Worth assume it was written about Vietnam. It wasn't. Stephen Stills wrote it in December 1966 after watching the Los Angeles Police Department clash with young people on Sunset Strip in what became known as the Pandora's Box riots, a series of confrontations sparked by a curfew ordinance that had shut down a popular music venue. The song was about cops and teenagers on a Los Angeles street corner, and yet it became one of the most enduring protest songs of the entire era. Buffalo Springfield released it as a single in January 1967, and it reached number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100.
There's a man with a gun over there.
What happened next was more interesting than the chart position. Radio programmers quickly realized the song could be applied to any situation involving authority, tension, and a crowd of people being told to disperse. By 1968, it was showing up in news broadcasts about Vietnam protests. By 1969, it was soundtracking the nightly news. The song had outgrown its origins entirely. It wasn't banned, but it was watched carefully by stations nervous about its malleability. Any song that could be a soundtrack to any protest, anywhere, made nervous people more nervous. Buffalo Springfield broke up in 1968. Stills went on to Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Neil Young, also in the band, went solo and then back to CSNY. The song they left behind has never stopped being relevant.
Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
Number 14, Society's Child, by Janis Ian, 1967. Janis Ian wrote Society's Child when she was 15 years old in 1965. The song was about an interracial teenage romance broken up by parental and social pressure. She recorded it at 16. By 17, she was being escorted out of concert venues by police while angry audience members threw things at the stage. The song was turned down by 22 record labels before Verve Forecast released it in 1966. Radio stations in the South refused to play it outright. Stations in other parts of the country were cautious enough that it barely registered on the charts at first. Then, conductor Leonard Bernstein featured it on a 1967 CBS television special about rock music, and the landscape shifted completely. The song entered the Billboard Hot 100 and reached number 14 that year. Ian later said the backlash was not limited to audiences. She received death threats. She was told by promoters in certain cities that they couldn't guarantee her safety. She was 16 and 17 years old during the worst of it. The song that sparked all of this was, at its heart, a quiet, melancholy folk song about two teenagers who couldn't be together because the world around them wouldn't allow it. Number 13, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised, by Gil Scott-Heron, 1970.
The revolution will not be brought to you by the Schaefer Award Theater.
Gil Scott-Heron released The Revolution Will Not Be Televised in 1970 on his debut album Small Talk at 125th and Lenox. The spoken word piece, delivered over percussion, with a voice that was part poetry reading, part sermon, part jazz improvisation, was not something mainstream radio knew what to do with. It was too long, too specific, too unapologetically black in its cultural references, and too direct in its contempt for commercial media to fit comfortably into a pop format. Most AM radio stations simply didn't play it. The reaction wasn't a formal ban. It was something quieter and more pervasive than that. The song existed in a different ecosystem entirely. college radio, community stations, word of mouth.
Black and green liberation jumpsuit that he had been saving for just the right occasion.
Scott Heron was 21 years old when he recorded it. He had grown up in Jackson, Tennessee, been sent to live with his grandmother in Lincoln, Pennsylvania after his parents separated, and had enrolled at Lincoln University, where Langston Hughes had studied, before transferring to Johns Hopkins to study writing. The piece itself was a catalog of television commercials, popular culture references, and consumer brand names, all deployed to make a single argument that real change wouldn't come from watching it happen on a screen. It would require people to actually show up. Scott Heron went on to release over a dozen albums over the following decades, influencing everyone from Public Enemy to Kanye West. He died in May 2011 at the age of 62. The Revolution Will Not Be Televised is now considered one of the founding documents of spoken word and hip-hop as art forms.
The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, not be televised.
Number 12, Ball of Confusion by The Temptations, 1970. Motown in 1970 was not the same label it had been 5 years earlier. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, the urban rebellions that followed, and the deepening of the Vietnam War had changed the emotional landscape of Black America, and producer Norman Whitfield was determined that The Temptations would reflect it. Ball of Confusion, That's What the World Is Today, was released in May 1970 and reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song was a rapid-fire inventory of late 1960s America. Racial tension, political demonstrations, the drug crisis, the war, the generation gap.
And it seems nobody's interested in learning.
The flight of white families to the suburbs, the emptiness of political promises. It moved fast and hit hard. For a Motown record aimed at pop radio, it was unusually blunt. A number of radio programmers were uncomfortable enough with its content to pull back on airplay. Not a formal ban, more a reluctance to lean into a song that named so many specific grievances so directly. The Temptations themselves had been through significant internal changes by this point, with lead singer David Ruffin having departed in 1968. Dennis Edwards had taken over the lead vocal duties, and his rougher, more urgent delivery suited the new direction. The song was a massive commercial success despite the unease it generated in certain quarters. Number 11, War by Edwin Starr, 1970. War was originally recorded by The Temptations in 1969 as an album track, but Motown held it back from single release, worried about its potential for controversy. The label instead gave the song to Edwin Starr, who recorded a more aggressive, urgent version that was released in June 1970. It reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there for 3 weeks. Even so, several radio stations were reluctant. Some program directors refused to add it to their rotation, citing the explicit anti-war position of the lyrics. Others played it, but nervously. The song was direct in a way that made certain corporate radio programmers uncomfortable. It didn't frame its opposition in metaphor or ambiguity, it simply stated its position. Motown had been right to be cautious about its commercial potential. They had been wrong about everything else. Edwin Starr had spent most of the 1960s as a working R&B artist with a handful of modest hits. War was the biggest moment of his career, and it arrived at exactly the right time. The Kent State shootings had occurred in May 1970, just weeks before the song was released, and the country was in a state of raw grief and anger. Starr's vocal performance, full of barely controlled fury, matched the emotional temperature of the moment precisely. Number 10, I Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die Rag by Country Joe and the Fish, 1967.
And it's 1, 2, 3, what are we fighting for?
Country Joe McDonald and his band, Country Joe and the Fish, released I Feel Like I'm Fixin' to Die Rag in 1967 on their debut album. With its deliberately cheerful, almost nursery rhyme melody and its savagely sarcastic lyrics about sending young men to die in Vietnam, the song occupied an uncomfortable space that radio programmers genuinely didn't know how to classify. The song was effectively shut out of AM radio entirely. No major station would play it. The content was considered too incendiary, too explicitly anti-war, and, perhaps most problematically, too hard to take seriously as an outrage while it was being sung to a jaunty tune that made audiences want to sing along.
It's 5, 6, 7, open up the pearly gates.
That combination of accessibility and fury made it more threatening, not less. Country Joe performed the song at Woodstock in August 1969, leading the crowd of several 100,000 people in a sing-along before launching into the full performance. The Woodstock footage turned the song into one of the defining documents of the anti-war movement. It was included on the Woodstock soundtrack album, which sold millions of copies, giving it an audience that radio had spent 2 years trying to prevent. Country Joe McDonald continued performing it for decades, including at Vietnam veterans' memorials, where its reception was complex and often deeply moving.
There ain't no time to wonder why. Whoopee, we're all gonna die.
Number 9, People Got to Be Free by the Rascals, 1968.
People everywhere just wanna be free.
The Rascals had been one of the most consistently successful pop rock acts in America since 1966, with 3 number-1 singles and a run of top 10 hits that had made them radio darlings. People Got to Be Free, released in the summer of 1968, was different. It arrived weeks after the assassination of Robert Kennedy and just months after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. The Rascals had written it in direct response to both deaths, despite, or perhaps because of, its topical origins. Several radio stations were cautious about adding it. The political climate in the summer of 1968 was so volatile that anything with the word freedom in it
In the valley, people got to be free.
and a direct emotional connection to the assassinations felt like a liability to nervous programmers. The Rascals pushed back. Felix Cavaliere and Eddie Brigati had written the song from a place of genuine grief and conviction, and the band refused to soften it. The song reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in August 1968 and remained there for 5 consecutive weeks, becoming their biggest hit. The audience clearly was not interested in the caution of radio programmers. The Rascals also made a public statement at the time that they would refuse to perform at any venue that didn't include black artists on the bill, a stance almost unheard of for a white pop act in 1968.
People everywhere just got to be free.
Number 8, Fortunate Son by Creedence Clearwater Revival, 1969.
It ain't me. It ain't me.
John Fogerty wrote A Fortunate Son in about 20 minutes. He later said the song came directly from his anger at watching wealthy, connected young men avoid the Vietnam draft, while men from working-class backgrounds had no such options. The specific target of his frustration was David Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower's grandson and Julie Nixon's fiancée, whose social circle represented exactly the kind of privilege Fogerty was describing. Creedence Clearwater Revival released it in September 1969 as the B-side to Down on the Corner. It became one of the most played songs of the anti-war era. It also made certain radio station owners deeply uncomfortable, particularly those with close ties to Republican politics or military sponsorship.
I ain't no fortunate one.
Some stations refused to add it, others played it reluctantly. The irony is that the song has since been used in countless military recruitment contexts and action movie trailers, almost always by people who hadn't listened closely to what it was actually about. Fogerty noted this irony repeatedly in later interviews. A song written to criticize the class dynamics of the Vietnam draft had been thoroughly absorbed into the cultural shorthand for patriotic toughness. The song peaked at number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100. It reached number 1 on the underground FM rock charts. It is still one of the most immediately recognizable guitar riffs in American music. Number 7, Masters of War by Bob Dylan, 1963.
It hide behind walls.
Bob Dylan recorded Masters of War for his second album, The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, released in May 1963. The song was a direct, unambiguous denunciation of the arms manufacturers and political figures who profited from war while sending other people's children to fight it. Dylan was 21 years old when he wrote it. The BBC placed it on their restricted list. Not a full ban, but a designation that kept it off general entertainment programming and confined it to contexts where its political content could be clearly labeled. In the United States, several radio stations declined to add it to rotation.
I can ever be hurled.
ABC Radio, which had banned Eve of Destruction 2 years later, was wary of Dylan's early political material from the beginning. Masters of War became one of the central texts of the folk revival and the anti-war movement. Dylan performed it at the 1963 National Emergency Civil Liberties Committee dinner in New York, an event that became notorious when he gave an acceptance speech suggesting he saw something of himself in Lee Harvey Oswald, who had assassinated President Kennedy a month earlier. The speech was controversial, but the song endured long past any specific news cycle. Dylan has continued performing it in concerts for over 60 years.
And I stand over your grave till I'm sure that you're dead.
Number 6, The Unknown Soldier by The Doors, 1968.
It's all over for the...
The Doors released The Unknown Soldier in March 1968 as a standalone single, accompanied by a short film that showed Jim Morrison being mock-executed by his bandmates. The song was a meditation on the human cost of war, structured around a military drum cadence that broke into a full rock arrangement after a simulated moment of death. M Radio largely refused to play it. The single reached only number 39 on the Billboard Hot 100, far below the chart positions of previous Doors singles like Light My Fire and Hello, I Love You.
Unknown soldier.
The rejection wasn't total, but the combination of its anti-war message, its theatrical simulation of execution, and the general unease that radio programmers felt about anything from The Doors by 1968, Jim Morrison's behavior had become a liability, kept it off most mainstream playlists. The Doors performed the song on the television program, The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, in the summer of 1968, including the mock execution sequence, which was one of the more unusual performances on American television that year. Morrison was arrested in New Haven, Connecticut in December 1967, the first rock musician ever arrested on stage, and his relationship with law enforcement had made him a figure that advertisers and radio stations were increasingly reluctant to be associated with.
Life is where the news is read.
Number 5, A Day in the Life by the Beatles, 1967.
A crowd of people stood and stared.
A Day in the Life closed the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album in June 1967 and was immediately recognized as one of the most ambitious pieces of music the Beatles had ever made. John Lennon's opening verses, Paul McCartney's middle section about a commuter's morning routine, and the orchestral crescendos that bookended the piece combined into something that sounded unlike anything else on pop radio. The BBC banned it. The corporation's stated reason was that the line, "I'd Love to Turn You On" was a reference to drug use. The BBC placed the entire song on its restricted list, meaning it could not be played in general entertainment programming on British radio or television.
Having read
The ban remained in place for years. The song was never released as a single in the UK, in part because the BBC's position made commercial airplay essentially impossible. In the United States, some stations declined to play it for similar reasons. The context of 1967, the summer of love, the proliferation of psychedelic culture, the generation gap, made any song that could be interpreted as endorsing drug use radioactive for mainstream broadcasters. The Beatles had become too important to ignore, but A Day in the Life was too strange, too honest, and too free-form to fit comfortably into any commercial format. It is now regularly cited as one of the greatest recordings in the history of popular music. Number 4, Street Fighting Man by the Rolling Stones, 1968. Mick Jagger had been in the crowd at a massive anti-war demonstration at London's American Embassy in Grosvenor Square in March 1968. 25,000 people, police on horseback, a confrontation that left dozens injured. He and Keith Richards had also watched the student uprising in Paris in May of that year from close range, as they were in the city during the height of the unrest. Out of those experiences came Street Fighting Man, recorded in the summer of 1968 and released as a US single on August 31st, 4 days after the violent clashes between police and protesters at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The timing could not have been more combustible. Chicago radio stations refused to play the song almost universally, fearing it would add fuel to a situation that was still smoldering. There was no official ban. The decisions were made station by station, program director by program director. But the effect was the same. The song peaked at number 48 on the Billboard Hot 100. Given that the previous Stones single, Jumpin' Jack Flash, had reached number 3, the drop was severe. Jagger's response to the radio blackout was characteristic. He told the press he was rather pleased they had banned it. He noted that the last time a Stones record was banned in America, it sold 1 million copies. The song has been a fixture of their live set lists for over 50 years. Number 3, Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire, 1965.
You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting?
F. Sloan wrote Eve of Destruction in 1964. In a single night of inspiration after his boss at Dunhill Records handed him an early Bob Dylan album and told him to stretch his writing. He wrote 5 songs that night. Eve of Destruction was one of them. Barry Maguire, who had just left the folk group The New Christy Minstrels and was looking for solo material, heard it and said immediately, "That's the one." The recording session took place in June 1965. Maguire's vocal was raw. He was reading the lyrics from a crumpled piece of paper, and the track was captured essentially in one take as a rough guide vocal. A local Los Angeles radio station got hold of the unfinished recording and started playing it before anyone could stop them. By the time Dunhill formally released it, it was already a phenomenon.
Tell me over and over and over.
And then the backlash arrived. A BC radio banned it from its network stations. Radio stations in Chicago, Washington, Baltimore, and Memphis refused to play it, labeling it leftist propaganda. Some stations called it an aid to the enemy in Vietnam. The BBC placed it on its restricted list. The song's writer, P.F. Sloan, said the media's strategy was to attack the song's credibility, attack his credibility, and paint both of them as communist sympathizers. The United States felt under threat, he wrote. Any positive press on me or Barry was considered unpatriotic. Despite all of it, Eve of Destruction reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in September 1965, knocking the Beatles' Help from the top spot. It was Barry Maguire's only top 40 hit. Radio stations that had banned it refused to play anything he released afterward.
We're on the eve of destruction.
#2, Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, 1970.
Tin soldiers and Nixon's coming.
On May 4th in 1970, Ohio National Guard troops opened fire on students at Kent State University during a protest against the expansion of the Vietnam War into Cambodia. 4 students were killed, 9 others were wounded. 2 of the dead had not even been participating in the protest. They were walking across campus to class. Neil Young saw photographs of the shooting in Life magazine. He went for a walk. An hour later, he came back and played what he had written to David Crosby. Crosby called the other 2 members of Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, and told them to get to a studio immediately. The 4 of them recorded Ohio at the record plant in Hollywood on May 21st, 17 days after the shootings. Atlantic Records president Ahmet Ertegun flew the master tape to New York personally. The single was released on June 4th.
For dead in Ohio.
From the moment of the shootings to the moment the song was available in record stores. 31 days. CSN and Y pulled their current hit single, Teach Your Children, from radio rotation to make room for it. Graham Nash later said no one in the band hesitated about that decision for a second. Several AM radio stations, particularly in Ohio and in markets with close ties to the Nixon administration, refused to add the song to rotation. It was banned for what program directors called its anti-Nixon and anti-war sentiments. The song peaked at #14 on the Billboard Hot 100. On FM radio and underground stations, it was everywhere. David Crosby later called keeping Nixon's name in the lyrics the bravest thing I ever heard Neil Young do.
Soldiers are cutting us down.
#1, Chicago by Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, 1971.
And they've chained him to a chair.
While Ohio is the CSNY protest song that history remembers, they recorded a second one at the same session, or close to it, that was in many ways just as direct, and has been almost completely swallowed by its companion's fame. Graham Nash wrote Chicago, also released as We Can Change the World, in response to the trial of the Chicago 7, the group of anti-war activists who had been arrested and prosecuted for their role in organizing the protests at the 1968 Democratic National Convention. The trial, which ran from September 1969 to February 1970, had been a circus of judicial misconduct and political prosecution. Judge Julius Hoffman had bound and gagged defendant Bobby Seale in the courtroom. The defendants had been charged with conspiracy and crossing state lines to incite a riot.
Won't you please come to Chicago for the help?
Nash's song was a direct appeal for people to come to Chicago and demonstrate their support. It was released on the 4-Way Street Live album in 1971. Many of the same radio stations that had been uncomfortable with Ohio gave Chicago an even colder reception. It was, if anything, more explicit in its call to action. 5 of the 7 original defendants were convicted of crossing state lines with intent to incite a riot, though those convictions were all eventually overturned on appeal in 1972. The song became an anthem for a movement that had been put on trial and, for a brief time, lost. Today, it's a footnote to the more famous song recorded in the same extraordinary burst of creative anger by the same band. But for anyone who lived through the Chicago 7 trial, it was just as essential. A reminder that music could still name what was happening, even when the courts were trying to make it disappear.
Help us make some more.
If any of these songs took you back to where you were when you first heard them, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more stories like these waiting for you